This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. The Three Musketeers, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 20. The Journey. At 2 o'clock in the morning, our four adventurers left Paris by the Barrière Saint-Denis. As long as it was dark, they remained silent. In spite of themselves, they submitted to the influence of obscurity, and apprehended ambushes on every side. With the first rays of day, their tongues were loosened; with the sun, gaiety revived. It was like the eve of a battle; the heart beat, the eyes laughed, and they felt that the life they were perhaps going to lose was, after all, a good thing. Besides, the appearance of the caravan was formidable. The black horses of the Musketeers, their martial carriage, with the regimental step of these noble companions of the soldier, would have betrayed the most strict incognito. The lackeys followed, armed to the teeth. All went well till they arrived in Chantilly, which they reached about 8 o'clock in the morning. They needed breakfast, and alighted at the door of an auberge, recommended by a sign representing St. Martin giving half his cloak to a poor man. They ordered the lackeys not to unsaddle the horses, and to hold themselves in readiness to set off again immediately. They entered the common hall, and placed themselves at table. A gentleman, who had just arrived by the route of Dammartin, was seated at the same table, and was breakfasting. He opened the conversation about rain and fine weather. The travellers replied. He drank to their good health, and the travellers returned his politeness. But at the moment Mousqueton came to announce that the horses were ready, and they were arising from table, the stranger proposed to Porthos to drink the health of the cardinal. Porthos replied that he asked no better if the stranger, in his turn, would drink the health of the king. The stranger cried that he acknowledged no other king but his Eminence. Porthos called him drunk, and the stranger drew his sword. "You have committed a piece of folly," said Athos, "but it can't be helped. There is no drawing back. Kill the fellow, and rejoin us just as soon as you can." All three remounted their horses, and set out at a good pace, while Porthos was promising his adversary to perforate him with all the thrusts known in the fencing schools. "There goes one!" cried Athos, at the end of 500 paces. "But why did that man attack Porthos rather than any one of us?" "Because, as Porthos was talking louder than the rest of us, he took him for the chief," said D'Artagnan. "I always said that this cadet from Gascony was a well of wisdom," murmured Athos, and the travellers continued their route. At Beauvais they stopped for 2 hours, as well to breathe their horses a little as to wait for Porthos. At the end of 2 hours, as Porthos did not come, not any news of him, they resumed their journey. At a league from Beauvais, where the road was confined between two high banks, they fell in with 8 or 10 men, who, taking advantage of the road being unpaved in this spot, appeared to be employed in digging holes and filling up the ruts with mud. Aramis, not liking to soil his boots with this artificial mortar, apostrophized them rather sharply. Athos wished to restrain him, but it was too late. The laborers began to jeer the travellers, and by their insolence disturbed the equanimity even of the cool Athos, who urged on his horse against one of them. Then each of these men retreated as far as the ditch, from which each took a concealed musket. The result was that our 7 travellers were outnumbered in weapons. Aramis received a ball which passed through his shoulder, and Mousqueton another ball which lodged in the fleshy part which prolongs the lower portion of the loins. Therefore Mousqueton alone fell from his horse, not because he was severely wounded, but not being able to see the wound, he judged it to be more serious than it really was. "It was an ambuscade!" shouted D'Artagnan. "Don't waste a charge! Forward!" Aramis, wounded as he was, seized the mane of his horse, which carried him on with the others. Mousqueton's horse rejoined them, and galloped by the side of his companions. "That will serve us for a relay," said Athos. "I would rather have had a hat," said D'Artagnan. "Mine was carried away by a ball. By my faith, it is very fortunate that the letter was not in it." "They'll kill poor Porthos when he comes up," said Aramis. "If Porthos were on his legs, he would have rejoined us by this time," said Athos. "My opinion is that on the ground the drunken man was not intoxicated." They continued at their best speed for 2 hours, although the horses were so fatigued that it was to be feared they would soon refuse service. The travellers had chosen crossroads, in the hope that they might meet with less interruption, but at Crèvecœur Aramis declared that he could proceed no further. In fact, it required all the courage which he concealed beneath his elegant form and polished manners to bear him so far. He grew more pale every minute, and they were obliged to support him on his horse. They lifted him off at the door of a cabaret, left Bazin with him, who, besides, in a skirmish was more embarrassing than useful, and set forward again, in the hope of sleeping at Amiens. "Morbleu!" said Athos, as they were again in motion. "Reduced to two masters and Grimaud and Planchet! Morbleu, I won't be their dupe, I will answer for it. I will neither open my mouth nor draw my sword between this and Calais. I swear by—" "Don't waste time in swearing," said D'Artagnan. "Let us gallop, if our horses will consent." And the travelers buried their rowels in their horses' flanks, who, thus vigorously stimulated, recovered their energies. They arrived at Amiens at midnight, and alighted at the auberge of the Golden Lily. The host had the appearance of as honest a man as any on earth. He received the travelers with his candlestick in one hand and his cotton nightcap in the other. He wished to lodge the two travelers each in a charming chamber, but unfortunately these charming chambers were at the opposite extremities of the hôtel. D'Artagnan and Athos refused them. The host replied that he had no other worthy of their excellencies, but the travelers declared they would sleep in the common chamber, each on a mattress which might be thrown upon the ground. The host insisted, but the travelers were firm, and he was obliged to do as they wished. They had just prepared their beds and barricaded their doors within, when someone knocked at the yard shutter. They demanded who was there, and recognizing the voices of their lackeys, opened the shutter. It was indeed Planchet and Grimaud. "Grimaud can take care of the horses," said Planchet. "If you are willing, gentlemen, I will sleep across your doorway, and then you will be certain that nobody can reach you." "And on what will you sleep?" said D'Artagnan. "Here is my bed," replied Planchet, producing a bundle of straw. "Come, then," said D'Artagnan, "you are right. Mine host's face does not please me at all. It is too gracious." "Nor me either," said Athos. Planchet mounted by the window and installed himself across the doorway, while Grimaud went and shut himself up in the stable, undertaking that by 5 o'clock in the morning he and the 4 horses should be ready. The night was quiet enough. Toward 2 o'clock in the morning somebody endeavored to open the door, but as Planchet awoke in an instant and cried, "Who goes there?" somebody replied that he was mistaken, and went away. At 4 o'clock in the morning they heard a terrible riot in the stables. Grimaud had tried to waken the stable boys, and the stable boys had beaten him. When they opened the window, they saw the poor lad lying senseless, with his head split by a blow with a pitchfork. Planchet went down into the yard, and wished to saddle the horses, but the horses were all used up. Mousqueton's horse, which had traveled for 5 or 6 hours without a rider the day before, might have been able to pursue the journey, but by an inconceivable error the veterinary surgeon, who had been sent for, as it appeared, to bleed one of the host's horses, had bled Mousqueton's. This began to be annoying. All these successive accidents were perhaps the result of chance, but they might be the fruits of a plot. Athos and D'Artagnan went out, while Planchet was sent to inquire if there were not 3 horses for sale in the neighborhood. At the door stood 2 horses, fresh, strong, and fully equipped. These would just have suited them. He asked where their masters were, and was informed that they had passed the night in the inn, and were then settling their bill with the host. Athos went down to pay the reckoning, while D'Artagnan and Planchet stood at the street door. The host was in a lower and back room, to which Athos was requested to go. Athos entered without the least mistrust, and took out 2 pistoles to pay the bill. The host was alone, seated before his desk, one of the drawers of which was partly open. He took the money which Athos offered to him, and after turning and turning it over and over in his hands, suddenly cried out that it was bad, and that he would have him and his companions arrested as forgers. "You blackguard!" cried Athos, going toward him. "I'll cut your ears off." At the same instant 4 men, armed to the teeth, entered by side doors, and rushed upon Athos. "I am taken!" shouted Athos, with all the power of his lungs. "Go on, D'Artagnan! Spur! Spur!" And he fired 2 pistols. D'Artagnan and Planchet did not require twice bidding. They unfastened the 2 horses that were waiting at the door, leaped upon them, buried their spurs in their sides, and set off at full gallop. "Do you know what has become of Athos?" asked D'Artagnan of Planchet, as they galloped on. "Ah, monsieur," said Planchet, "I saw one fall at each of his 2 shots, and he appeared to me, through the glass door, to be fighting with his sword with the others." "Brave Athos," murmured D'Artagnan, "and to think that we are compelled to leave him. Maybe the same fate awaits us 2 paces hence. Forward, Planchet, forward! You are a brave fellow." "As I told you, monsieur," replied Planchet, "Picards are found out by being used. Besides, I am here in my own country, and that excites me." And both, with free use of the spur, arrived at St. Omer without drawing bit. At St. Omer they breathed their horses with the bridles passed under their arms for fear of accident, and ate a morsel from their hands on the stones of the street, after they departed again. At 100 paces from the gates of Calais, D'Artagnan's horse gave out, and could not be made by any means to get up again, the blood flowing from his eyes and his nose. There still remained Planchet's horse, but he stopped short and could not be made to move a step. Fortunately, as we have said, they were within 100 paces of the city. They left their 2 nags upon the high road, and ran toward the quay. Planchet called his master's attention to a gentleman who had just arrived with his lackey, and only preceded them by about 50 paces. They made all speed to come up to this gentleman, who appeared to be in great haste. His boots were covered with dust, and he inquired if he could not instantly cross over to England. "Nothing would be more easy," said the captain of a vessel ready to set sail. "But this morning came an order to let no one leave without express permission from the cardinal." "I have that permission," said the gentleman, drawing the paper from his pocket. "Here it is." "Have it examined by the governor of the port," said the shipmaster, "and give me the preference." "Where shall I find the governor?" "At his country house." "And that is situated?" "At a quarter of a league from the city. Look, you may see it from here, at the foot of that little hill, that slated roof." "Very well," said the gentleman, and with his lackey he took the road to the governor's country house. D'Artagnan and Planchet followed the gentleman at a distance of 500 paces. Once outside the city, D'Artagnan overtook the gentleman as he was entering a little wood. "Monsieur, you appear to be in great haste." "No one can be more so, monsieur." "I am sorry for that," said D'Artagnan, "for as I am in great haste likewise, I wish to beg you to render me a service." "What?" "To let me sail first." "That's impossible," said the gentleman. "I have traveled 60 leagues in 40 hours, and by tomorrow at midday I must be in London." "I have performed that same distance in 40 hours, and by 10 o'clock in the morning I must be in London." "Very sorry, monsieur, but I was here first, and I will not sail second." "I am sorry too, monsieur, but I arrived second and must sail first." "The king's service," said the gentleman. "My own service," said D'Artagnan. "But this is a needless quarrel you seek with me, as it seems to be." "Parbleu! What do you desire it to be?" "What do you want?" "Would you like to know?" "Certainly." "Well, then, I wish that order of which you are bearer, seeing that I have not one of my own, and must have one." "You jest, I presume." "I never jest." "Let me pass." "You shall not pass." "My brave young man, I will blow out your brains. Hola, Lupin, my pistols!" "Planchet," called out D'Artagnan, "take care of the lackey. I will manage the master." Planchet, emboldened by the first exploit, sprang upon Lubin, and being strong and vigorous, he soon got him on the broad of his back, and placed his knee upon his breast. "Go on with your affair, monsieur," cried Planchet. "I have finished mine." Seeing this, the gentleman drew his sword, and sprang upon D'Artagnan. But he had too strong an adversary. In 3 seconds D'Artagnan had wounded him 3 times, exclaiming at each thrust, "One for Athos, one for Porthos, and one for Aramis." At the third hit the gentleman fell like a log. D'Artagnan believed him to be dead, or at least insensible, and went toward him for the purpose of taking the order. But the moment he extended his hand to search for it, the wounded man, who had not dropped his sword, plunged the point into D'Artagnan's breast, crying, "One for you!" "And one for me, the best for last!" cried D'Artagnan, furious, nailing him to the earth with a 4th thrust through his body. This time the gentleman closed his eyes and fainted. D'Artagnan searched his pockets, and took from one of them the order for the passage. It was in the name of the Comte de Wardes. Then, casting a glance on the handsome young man, who was scarcely 25 years of age, and whom he was leaving in his gore, deprived of sense and perhaps dead, he gave a sigh for that unaccountable destiny which leads men to destroy each other for the interests of people who are strangers to them, and who often do not even know they exist. But he was soon aroused from those reflections by Lubin, who uttered loud cries and screamed for help with all his might. Planchet grasped him by the throat, and pressed as hard as he could. "Monsieur," said he, "as long as I hold him in this manner he can't cry, I'll be bound; but as soon as I let go he will howl again. I know him for a Norman, and Normans are obstinate." In fact, tightly held as he was, Lubin endeavored still to cry out. "Stay," said D'Artagnan, and taking out his handkerchief, he gagged him. "Now," said Planchet, "let us bind him to a tree." This being properly done, they drew the Comte de Wardes close to his servant, and as night was approaching, and the wounded man and the bound man were at some little distance within the wood, it was evident they were likely to remain there till the next day. "And now," said D'Artagnan, "to the governor's." "But you are wounded, it seems," said Planchet. "Oh, that's nothing. Let us attend to what is more pressing first, and then we will attend to my wound. Besides, it does not seem very dangerous." And they both set forward as fast as they could toward the country house of the worthy functionary. The Comte de Wardes was announced, and D'Artagnan was introduced. "You have an order signed by the cardinal?" said the governor. "Yes, monsieur," replied D'Artagnan. "Here it is." "Ah, it is quite regular and explicit," said the governor. "Most likely," said D'Artagnan. "I am one of his most faithful servants. It appears that his Eminence is anxious to prevent someone from crossing to England." "Yes, a certain D'Artagnan, a Béarnese gentleman who left Paris in company with 3 of his friends, with the intention of going to London." "Do you know him personally?" asked the governor. "Whom?" "This D'Artagnan." "Perfectly well." "Describe him to me, then." "Nothing more easy." And D'Artagnan gave, feature for feature, a description of the Comte de Wardes. "Is he accompanied?" "Yes, by a lackey named Lubin." "We will keep a sharp lookout for them, and if we lay hands on them, his Eminence may be assured they will be reconducted to Paris under a good escort." "And by doing so, Monsieur the Governor," said D'Artagnan, "you will deserve well of the cardinal. Shall you see him on your return, Monsieur Count?" "Without a doubt." "Tell him, I beg you, that I am his humble servant." "I will not fail." Delighted with this assurance, the governor countersigned the passport and delivered it to D'Artagnan. D'Artagnan lost no time in useless compliments. He thanked the governor, bowed, and departed. Once outside, he and Planchet set off as fast as they could, and by making a long detour, avoided the wood and re-entered the city by another gate. The vessel was quite ready to sail, and the captain was waiting on the wharf. "Well," said he, on perceiving D'Artagnan. "Here is my pass countersigned," said the latter. "And that other gentleman?" "He will not go today," said D'Artagnan. "But here, I'll pay you for us two." "In that case, let us go," said the shipmaster. "Let us go," repeated D'Artagnan. He leaped with Planchet into the boat, and 5 minutes after they were on board. It was time, for they had scarcely sailed half a league when D'Artagnan saw a flash and heard a detonation. It was the cannon which announced the closing of the port. He had now leisure to look to his wound. Fortunately, as D'Artagnan had thought, it was not dangerous. The point of the sword had touched a rib and glanced along the bone. Still further, his shirt had stuck to the wound, and he had lost only a few drops of blood. D'Artagnan was worn out with fatigue. A mattress was laid upon the deck for him. He threw himself upon it and fell asleep. On the morrow, at break of day, they were still 3 or 4 leagues from the coast of England. The breeze had been so light all night they had made but little progress. At 10 o'clock the vessel cast anchor in the harbor of Dover, and at 10:30 D'Artagnan placed his foot on English land, crying, "Here I am at last!" But that was not all. They must get to London. In England the post was well served. D'Artagnan and Planchet took each a post-horse, and a postilion rode before them. In a few hours they were in the capital. D'Artagnan did not know London. He did not know a word of English, but he wrote the name of Buckingham on a piece of paper, and everyone pointed out to him the way to the Duke's hotel. The Duke was at Windsor hunting with the king. D'Artagnan inquired for the confidential valet of the Duke, who, having accompanied him in all his voyages, spoke French perfectly well. He told him that he came from Paris on an affair of life and death, and that he must speak with his master instantly. The confidence with which D'Artagnan spoke convinced Patrick, which was the name of this minister of the minister. He ordered 2 horses to be saddled, and himself went as guide to the young guardsman. As for Planchet, he had been lifted from his horse as stiff as a rush. The poor lad's strength was almost exhausted. D'Artagnan seemed iron. On their arrival at the castle, they learned that Buckingham and the king were hawking in the marshes 2 or 3 leagues away. In 20 minutes they were on the spot named. Patrick soon caught the sound of his master's voice calling his falcon. "Whom must I announce to my Lord Duke?" asked Patrick. "The young man who one evening sought a quarrel with him on the Pont Neuf, opposite the Samaritaine." "A singular introduction. You will find that it is as good as another." Patrick galloped off, reached the duke, and announced to him in the terms directed that a messenger awaited him. Buckingham at once remembered the circumstance, and suspecting that something was going on in France of which it was necessary he should be informed, he only took the time to inquire where the messenger was, and recognizing from afar the uniform of the Guards, he put his horse into a gallop, and rode straight up to D'Artagnan. Patrick discreetly kept in the background. "No misfortune has happened to the queen," cried Buckingham, the instant he came up, throwing all his fear and love into the question. "I believe not. Nevertheless, I believe she runs some great peril from which your Grace alone can extricate her." "I?" cried Buckingham. "What is it? I should be too happy to be of any service to her. Speak, speak." "Take this letter," said D'Artagnan. "This letter? From whom comes this letter?" "From her Majesty, as I think." "From her Majesty?" said Buckingham, becoming so pale that D'Artagnan feared he would faint as he broke the seal. "What is this rent?" said he, showing D'Artagnan a place where it had been pierced through. "Ah," said D'Artagnan, "I did not see that. It was the sword of the Comte de Wardes which made that hole, when he gave me a good thrust in the breast." "You are wounded?" asked Buckingham, as he opened the letter. "Nothing but a scratch," said D'Artagnan. "Just heaven, what have I read?" cried the duke. "Patrick, remain here, or rather join the king, wherever he may be, and tell his Majesty that I humbly beg him to excuse me, but an affair of the greatest importance recalls me to London. Come, monsieur, come." And both set off towards the capital at full gallop. End of chapter 20.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Clark Bell, Tucson, Arizona. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, Chapter 21, The Countess de Winter. As they rode along, the Duke endeavored to draw from D'Artagnan not all that had happened, but what D'Artagnan himself knew. By adding all that he heard from the mouth of this young man to his own remembrances, he was enabled to form a pretty exact idea of a position of the seriousness of which, for the rest, the queen's letter, short but explicit, gave him the clue. But that which astonished him the most was that the cardinal, so deeply interested in preventing this young man from setting his foot in England, had not succeeded in arresting him on the road. It was then, upon the manifestation of this astonishment, that D'Artagnan related to him the precaution taken, and how, thanks to the devotion of his three friends, whom he had left scattered and bleeding on the road, he had succeeded in coming off with a single sword thrust, which had pierced the queen's letter, and for which he had repaid Monsieur de Wardes with such terrible coin. While he was listening to this recital, delivered with the greatest simplicity, the duke looked from time to time at the young man with astonishment, as if he could not comprehend how so much prudence, courage, and devotedness could be allied with a countenance which indicated not more than 20 years. The horses went like the wind, and in a few minutes they were at the gates of London. D'Artagnan imagined that on arriving in town the duke would slacken his pace, but it was not so. He kept on his way at the same rate, heedless about upsetting those whom he met on the road. In fact, in crossing the city 2 or 3 accidents of this kind happened, but Buckingham did not even turn his head to see what became of those he had knocked down. D'Artagnan followed him amid cries which strongly resembled curses. On entering the court of his hotel, Buckingham sprang from his horse, and without thinking what became of the animal, threw the bridle on his neck, and sprang toward the vestibule. D'Artagnan did the same, with a little more concern, however, for the noble creatures whose merits he fully appreciated. But he had the satisfaction of seeing 3 or 4 grooms run from the kitchens and the stables and busy themselves with the steeds. The duke walked so fast that D'Artagnan had some trouble in keeping up with him. He passed through several apartments, of an elegance of which even the greatest nobles of France had not even an idea, and arrived at length in a bedchamber which was at once a miracle of taste and of richness. In the alcove of this chamber was a door concealed in the tapestry, which the duke opened with a little gold key which he wore suspended from his neck by a chain of the same metal. With discretion D'Artagnan remained behind, but at the moment when Buckingham crossed the threshold he turned round, and seeing the hesitation of the young man, "Come in," cried he, "and if you have the good fortune to be admitted to her Majesty's presence, tell her what you have seen." Encouraged by this invitation, D'Artagnan followed the duke, who closed the door after them. The two found themselves in a small chapel, covered with a tapestry of Persian silk, worked with gold, and brilliantly lighted with a vast number of candles. Over a species of altar, and beneath a canopy of blue velvet, surmounted by white and red plumes, was a full-length portrait of Anne of Austria, so perfect in its resemblance that D'Artagnan uttered a cry of surprise on beholding it. One might believe the queen was about to speak. On the altar, and beneath the portrait, was the casket containing the diamond studs. The duke approached the altar, knelt as a priest might have done before a crucifix, and opened the casket. "There," said he, drawing from the casket a large bow of blue ribbon all sparkling with diamonds, "there are the precious studs which I have taken an oath should be buried with me. The queen gave them to me. The queen requires them again. Her will be done, like that of God in all things." Then he began to kiss, one after another, those dear studs with which he was about to part. All at once he uttered a terrible cry. "What is the matter?" exclaimed D'Artagnan anxiously. "What has happened to you, my lord?" "All is lost!" cried Buckingham, becoming as pale as a corpse. "2 of the studs are wanting. There are only 10. "Can you have lost them, my lord? Or do you think they have been stolen?" "They have been stolen," replied the duke, "and it is the cardinal who has dealt this blow. Hold, see, the ribbons which held them have been cut with scissors." "If my lord suspects they have been stolen, perhaps the person who stole them still has them in his hands." "Wait, wait," said the duke. "The only time I have worn these studs was at a ball given by the king 8 days ago at Windsor. The Countess de Winter, with whom I had quarreled, became reconciled to me at that ball. That reconciliation was nothing but the vengeance of a jealous woman. I have never seen her from that day. The woman is an agent of the cardinal." "He has agents, then, throughout the world?" cried D'Artagnan. "Oh, yes," said Buckingham, grating his teeth with rage. "Yes, he is a terrible antagonist. But when is this ball to take place?" "Monday next." "Monday next! Still 5 days before us. That's more time than we want. Patrick!" cried the duke, opening the door to the chapel. "Patrick!" His confidential valet appeared. "My jeweler and my secretary." The valet went out with a mute promptitude which showed him accustomed to obey blindly and without reply. But although the jeweler had been mentioned first, it was the secretary who first made his appearance. That was simply because he lived in the hotel. He found Buckingham seated at a table in his bedchamber, writing orders with his own hand. "Mr. Jackson," said he, "go instantly to the Lord Chancellor, and tell him that I charge him with the execution of these orders. I wish them to be promulgated immediately." "But, my lord, if the Lord Chancellor interrogates me upon the motives which may have led your Grace to adopt such an extraordinary measure, what shall I reply?" "That such is my pleasure, and that I will answer for my will to no man." "Will that be the answer," replied the secretary, smiling, "which he must transmit to his Majesty, if by chance his Majesty should have the curiosity to know why no vessel is to leave any of the ports of Great Britain?" "You are right, Mr. Jackson," replied Buckingham. "He will say in that case to the king that I am determined on war, and that this measure is my first act of hostility against France." The secretary bowed and retired. "We are safe on that side," said Buckingham, turning toward D'Artagnan. "If the studs are not yet gone to Paris, they will not arrive till after you." "How so?" "I have just placed an embargo on all vessels at present in his Majesty's ports, and without particular permission, not one dare lift an anchor. D'Artagnan looked with stupefaction at a man who thus employed the unlimited power with which he was clothed by the confidence of a king in the prosecution of his intrigues. Buckingham saw by the expression of the young man's face what was passing in his mind, and he smiled. "Yes," said he, "yes, Anne of Austria is my true queen. Upon a word from her I would betray my country. I would betray my king. I would betray my God. She asked me not to send the Protestants of La Rochelle the assistance I promised them. I have not done so. I broke my word, it is true, but what signifies that? I obeyed my love. And have I not been richly paid for that obedience? It was to that obedience I owe her portrait." D'Artagnan was amazed to note by what fragile and unknown threads the destinies of nations and the lives of men are suspended. He was lost in these reflections when the goldsmith entered. He was an Irishman, one of the most skillful of his craft, and who himself confessed that he gained 100,000 livres a year by the Duke of Buckingham. "Mr. O'Reilly," said the Duke, leading him into the chapel, "look at these diamond studs, and tell me what they are worth apiece." The goldsmith cast a glance at the elegant manner in which they were set, calculated one with another what the diamonds were worth, and without hesitation said, 1,500 pistoles each, my lord." "How many days would it require to make 2 studs exactly like them? You see there are 2 wanting." 8 days, my lord." "I will give you 3,000 pistoles apiece if I can have them by the day after tomorrow." "My lord, they shall be yours." "You are a jewel of a man, Mr. O'Reilly, but that is not all. These studs cannot be trusted to anybody. It must be done in the palace." "Impossible, my lord. There is no one but myself can so execute them that one cannot tell the new from the old." "Therefore, my dear Mr. O'Reilly, you are my prisoner, and if you wish ever to leave my palace, you cannot. So make the best of it. Name to me such of your workmen as you need, and point out the tools they must bring." The goldsmith knew the duke. He knew all objection would be useless, and instantly determined how to act. "May I be permitted to inform my wife?" said he. "Oh, you may even see her if you like, my dear Mr. O'Reilly. Your captivity shall be mild, be assured, and as every inconvenience deserves its indemnification, here is, in addition to the price of the studs, an order for 1,000 pistoles to make you forget the annoyance I cause you." D'Artagnan could not get over the surprise created in him by this minister who thus open-handed sported with men and millions. As to the goldsmith, he wrote to his wife, sending her the order for the 1,000 pistoles, and charged her to send him in exchange his most skillful apprentice, an assortment of diamonds of which he gave the names and the weights, and the necessary tools. Buckingham conducted the goldsmith to the chamber destined for him, and which at the end of a half-hour was transformed into a workshop. Then he placed a sentinel at each door with an order to admit nobody upon any pretense but his valet de chambre, Patrick. We need not add that the goldsmith, O'Reilly, and his assistant were prohibited from going out under any pretext. This point settled, the duke turned to D'Artagnan. "Now, my young friend," said he, "England is all our own. What do you wish for? What do you desire?" "A bed, my lord," replied D'Artagnan. "At present, I confess, that is the thing I stand most in need of." Buckingham gave D'Artagnan a chamber adjoining his own. He wished to have the young man at hand, not that he at all mistrusted him, but for the sake of having someone to whom he could constantly talk of the queen. In 1 hour after, the ordinance was published in London that no vessel bound for France should leave port, not even the packet-boat with letters. In the eyes of everyone, this was a declaration of war between the 2 kingdoms. On the day after the morrow, by 11 o'clock, the 2 diamond studs were finished, and they were so completely imitated, so perfectly alike, that Buckingham could not tell the new ones from the old ones, and experts in such matters would have been deceived as he was. He immediately called D'Artagnan. "Here," said he to him, "are the diamond studs that you came to bring, and be my witness that I have done all that human power could do." "Be satisfied, my lord. I will tell all that I have seen. But does your grace mean to give me the studs without the casket?" "The casket would encumber you. Besides, the casket is the more precious from being all that is left to me. You will say that I keep it. I will perform your commission, word for word, my lord." "And now," resumed Buckingham, looking earnestly at the young man, "how shall I ever acquit myself of the debt I owe you?" D'Artagnan blushed up to the whites of his eyes. He saw that the duke was searching for a means of making him accept something, and the idea that the blood of his friends and himself was about to be paid for with English gold was strangely repugnant to him. "Let us understand each other, my lord," replied D'Artagnan, "and let us make things clear beforehand, in order that there may be no mistake. I am in the service of the King and Queen of France, and form part of the company of Monsieur Dessessart, who, as well as his brother-in-law, Monsieur de Tréville, is particularly attached to their majesties. What I have done, then, has been for the queen, and not at all for your grace. And still further, it is very probable I should not have done anything of this if it had not been to make myself agreeable to someone who is my lady as the queen is yours." "Yes," said the duke, smiling, "and I even believe that I know that other person. It is—" "My lord, I have not named her," interrupted the young man warmly. "That is true," said the duke, "and it is to this person I am bound to discharge my debt of gratitude." "You have said, my lord, for truly at this moment, when there is question of war, I confess to you that I see nothing in your grace but an Englishman, and consequently an enemy, whom I should have much greater pleasure in meeting on the field of battle than in the park at Windsor or the corridors of the Louvre, all which, however, will not prevent me from executing, to the very point, my commission, or from laying down my life, if there be need of it, to accomplish it. But I repeat it to your grace, without your having personally on that account more to thank me for in this second interview than for what I did for you in the first." "We say, proud as a Scotsman," murmured the Duke of Buckingham. "And we say, proud as a Gascon," replied D'Artagnan. "The Gascons are the Scots of France." D'Artagnan bowed to the duke and was retiring. "Well, are you going away in that manner?" "Where? And how?" "That's true. 'Fore gad, these Frenchmen have no consideration. I had forgotten that England was an island and that you were the king of it. Go to the riverside, ask for the brig Sund, and give this letter to your captain. He will convey you to a little port where certainly you are not expected, and which is ordinarily only frequented by fishermen." "The name of that port?" "St. Valery. But listen, when you have arrived there, you will go to a mean tavern, without a name and without a sign, a mere fisherman's hut. You cannot be mistaken, there is but one. Afterward, you will ask for the host, and will repeat to him the word 'forward,' which means, in French, 'en avant.' It is the password. He will give you a horse, all saddled, and will point out to you the road you ought to take. You will find, in the same way, 4 relays on your route. If you will give at each of these relays your address in Paris, the 4 horses will follow you thither. You already know 2 of them, and you appeared to appreciate them like a judge. They were those we rode on, and you may rely upon me for the others not being inferior to them. These horses are equipped for the field. However proud you may be, you will not refuse to accept one of them, and to request your 3 companions to accept the others. That is, in order to make war against us. Besides, the end justifies the means, as you Frenchmen say, does it not?" "Yes, my lord, I accept them," said D'Artagnan, "and if it please God, we will make good use of your presence." "Well, now your hand, young man, Perhaps we shall soon meet on the field of battle, but in the meantime we shall part good friends, I hope." "Yes, my lord, but with the hope of soon becoming enemies." "Be satisfied. I promise you that." "I depend upon your word, my lord." D'Artagnan bowed to the duke and made his way as quickly as possible to the riverside. Opposite the Tower of London he found the vessel that had been named to him, delivered his letter to the captain, who, after having it examined by the governor of the port, made immediate preparations to sail. 50 vessels were waiting to set out. Passing alongside one of them, D'Artagnan fancied he perceived on board it the woman of Meung, the same whom the unknown gentleman had called Milady, and whom D'Artagnan had thought so handsome. But thanks to the current of the stream and a fair wind, his vessel passed so quickly that he had little more than a glimpse of her. The next day, about 9 o'clock in the morning, he landed at St. Valery. D'Artagnan went instantly in search of the inn, and easily discovered it by the riotous noise which resounded from it. War between England and France was talked of as near and certain, and the jolly sailors were having a carousal. D'Artagnan made his way through the crowd, advanced toward the host, and pronounced the word "Forward." The host instantly made him a sign to follow, went out with him by a door which opened into a yard, led him to the stable where a saddled horse awaited him, and asked him if he stood in need of anything else. "I want to know the route I am to follow," said D'Artagnan. "Go from hence to Blangy, and from Blangy to Neufchâtel. At Neufchâtel go to the tavern of the Golden Harrow. Give the password to the landlord, and you will find, as you have here, a horse ready saddled." "Have I anything to pay?" demanded D'Artagnan. "Everything is paid," replied the host, "and liberally. Begone, and may God guide you." "Amen," cried the young man, and set off at full gallop. 4 hours later he was in Neufchâtel. He strictly followed the instructions he had received. At Neufchâtel, as at St. Valery, he found a horse quite ready and awaiting him. He was about to remove the pistols from the saddle he had quit to the one he was about to fill, but he found the holsters furnished with similar pistols. "Your address at Paris?" "Hôtel of the Guards, company of Dessessart." "Enough," replied the questioner. "Which route must I take?" demanded D'Artagnan in his turn. "That of Rouen, but you will leave the city on your right. You must stop at the little village of Écueil, in which there is but one tavern, the Shield of France. Don't condemn it from appearances. You will find a horse in the stables quite as good as this." "The same password?" "Exactly. Adieu, master. A good journey, gentlemen. Do you want anything?" D'Artagnan shook his head and set off at full speed. At Écueil the same scene was repeated. He found as provident a host and a fresh horse. He left his address as he had done before, and set off again at the same pace for Pontoise. At Pontoise he changed his horse for the last time, and at 9 o'clock galloped into the yard of Tréville's hotel. He had made nearly 60 leagues in little more than 12 hours. Monsieur de Tréville received him as if he had seen him that same morning, only, when pressing his hand a little more warmly than usual, he informed him that the company of Dessessart was on duty at the Louvre, and that he might repair at once to his post. End of chapter 21.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Thomas Daverin. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 22. The Ballet of La Merlaison. On the morrow, nothing was talked of in Paris but the ball, which the aldermen of the city were to give the king and queen, and in which their majesties were to dance the famous La Merlaison, the favorite ballet of the king. 8 days had been occupied in preparations at the Hôtel de Ville for this important evening. The city carpenters had erected scaffolds upon which the invited ladies were to be placed. The city grocer had ornamented the chambers with 200 flambeaux of white wax, a piece of luxury unheard of at that period, and 20 violins were ordered, and the price for them fixed at double the usual rate, upon condition, said the report, that they should be played all night. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the Sieur de la Coste, ensign in the King's Guards, followed by 2 officers and several archers of that body, came to the city registrar named Clement, and demanded of him all the keys of the rooms and offices of the hotel. These keys were given up to him instantly. Each of them had a ticket attached to it, by which it might be recognized, and from that moment the Sieur de la Coste was charged with the care of all the doors and all the avenues. At 11 o'clock came in his turn Duhallier, captain of the guards, bringing with him 50 archers, who were distributed immediately throughout the Hôtel de Ville at the doors assigned them. At 3 o'clock came 2 companies of the guards, one French, the other Swiss. The company of French guards was composed of half of Monsieur Duhallier's men and half of Monsieur Dessessart's men. At 6 in the evening the guests began to come. As fast as they entered, they were placed in the grand saloon, on the platforms prepared for them. At 9 o'clock Madame la Première Présidente arrived. As next to the Queen she was the most considerable personage of the fête, she was received by the city officials and placed in a box opposite to that which the Queen was to occupy. At 10 o'clock the King's collation, consisting of preserves and other delicacies, was prepared in the little room on the side of the Church of Saint Jean, in front of the silver buffet of the city, which was guarded by 4 archers. At midnight great cries and loud acclamations were heard. It was the King, who was passing through the streets which led from the Louvre to the Hôtel de Ville, and which were all illuminated with colored lanterns. Immediately the aldermen, clothed in their robes and preceded by 6 sergeants, each holding a flambeau in his hand, went to attend upon the King, whom they met on the steps, where the provost of the merchants made him a speech of welcome, a compliment to which his Majesty replied with an apology for coming so late, laying the blame upon the cardinal, who had detained him till 11 o'clock, talking of affairs of state. His Majesty in full dress was accompanied by His Royal Highness, Monsieur le Comte de Soissons, by the Grand Prior, by the Duc de Longueville and the Duc de Boeuf, by the Comte d'Harcourt, by the Comte de la Roche-Guyon, by Monsieur de Liancourt, by Monsieur de Baradas, and by Comte de Cramail and the Chevalier de Souveret. Everybody noticed that the king looked dull and preoccupied. A private room had been prepared for the king and another for Monsieur. At each of these closets was placed masquerade dresses. The same had been done for the queen and Madame the President. The nobles and ladies of their Majesties' suites were to dress 2 by 2 in chambers prepared for the purpose. Before entering his closet, the king desired to be informed the moment the cardinal arrived. Half an hour after the entrance of the king, fresh acclamations were heard. These announced the arrival of the queen. The aldermen did as they'd done before, and preceded by their sergeants, advanced to receive their illustrious guest. The queen entered the great hall, and it was remarked that, like the king, she looked dull and even weary. At the moment she entered, the curtain of the small gallery, which to that time had been closed, was drawn, and the pale face of the cardinal appeared, he being dressed as a Spanish cavalier. His eyes were fixed upon those of the queen, and a smile of terrible joy passed over his lips. The queen did not wear her diamond studs. The queen remained for a short time to receive the compliments of the city dignitaries and to reply to the salutations of the ladies. All at once the king appeared with the cardinal at one of the doors of the hall. The cardinal was speaking to him in a low voice, and the king was very pale. The king made his way through the crowd without a mask and the ribbons of his doublet scarcely tied. He went straight to the queen, and in an altered voice said, "Why, madame, have you not thought proper to wear your diamond studs, when you know it would give me so much gratification?" The queen cast a glance around her, and saw the cardinal behind, with a diabolical smile on his countenance. "Sire," replied the queen, with a faltering voice, "because in the midst of such a crowd as this, I feared some accident might happen to them." "And you are wrong, madame. If I made you that present, it was that you might adorn yourself therewith. I tell you, you are wrong." The voice of the king was tremulous with anger. Everybody looked and listened with astonishment, comprehending nothing of what passed. "Sire," said the queen, "I can send for them to the Louvre, where they are, and thus your majesty's wishes will be complied with." "Do so, madam, do so, and that at once, for within an hour the ballet will commence." The queen bent in token of submission, and followed the ladies who were to conduct her to her room. On his part, the king returned to his apartment. There was a moment of trouble and confusion in the assembly. Everybody had remarked that something had passed between the king and queen, but both of them had spoken so low that everybody, out of respect, withdrew several steps, so that nobody had heard anything. The violins began to sound with all their might, but nobody listened to them. The king came out first from his room. He was in a most elegant hunting costume, and Monsieur and the other nobles were dressed like him. This was the costume that best became the king. So dressed, he really appeared the first gentleman of his kingdom. The cardinal drew near the king and placed in his hand a small casket. The king opened it and found in it 2 diamond studs. "What does this mean?" demanded he of the cardinal. "Nothing," replied the latter. "Only if the queen has the studs, which I very much doubt, count them, sire, and you will only find 10. Ask her majesty who could have stolen from her the 2 studs that are here." The king looked at the cardinal as if to interrogate him, but he had not time to address any question to him. A cry of admiration burst from every mouth. If the king appeared to be the first gentleman of his kingdom, the queen was without doubt the most beautiful woman in France. It is true that the habit of a huntress became her admirably. She wore a beaver hat with blue feathers, a surtout of gray pearl velvet fastened with diamond clasps, and a petticoat of blue satin, embroidered with silver. On her left shoulder sparkled the diamond studs, on a bow of the same color as the plumes in the petticoat. The king trembled with joy, and the cardinal with vexation. Although distant as they were from the queen, they could not count the studs. The queen had them. The only question was, had she 10 or 12? At that moment the violin sounded the signal for the ballet. The king advanced toward Madame the Presidente, with whom he was to dance, and His Highness Monsieur with the queen. They took their places, and the ballet began. The king danced facing the queen, and every time he passed by her, he devoured with his eyes those studs of which he could not ascertain the number. A cold sweat covered the brow of the cardinal. The ballet lasted an hour, and had 16 entrées. The ballet ended amid the applause of the whole assemblage, and everyone reconducted his lady to her place, but the king took advantage of the privilege he had of leaving his lady to advance eagerly toward the queen. "I thank you, madame," said he, "for the deference you have shown to my wishes, but I think you want 2 of the studs, and I bring them back to you." With these words he held out to the queen the 2 studs the cardinal had given him. "How, sire?" cried the young queen, affecting surprise. "You are giving me, then, 2 more? I shall have 14." In fact, the king counted them, and the 12 studs were all on her majesty's shoulder. The king called the cardinal. "What does this mean, Monsieur Cardinal?" asked the king in a severe tone. "This means, sire," replied the cardinal, "that I was desirous of presenting her majesty with these 2 studs, and that not daring to offer them myself, I adopted this means of inducing her to accept them." "And I am the more grateful to your eminence," replied Anne of Austria, with a smile that proved she was not the dupe of this ingenious gallantry, "from being certain that these 2 studs alone have cost you as much as all the others cost his majesty." Then, saluting the king and the cardinal, the queen resumed her way to the chamber in which she had dressed, and where she was to take off her costume. The attention which we have been obliged to give during the commencement of this chapter to the illustrious personages we have introduced into it has diverted us from an instant from him, to whom Anne of Austria owed the extraordinary triumph she had obtained over the cardinal, and who, confounded, unknown, lost in the crowd gathered at one of the doors, looked on this scene comprehensible only to four persons: the king, the queen, his eminence, and himself. The queen had just regained her chamber, and D'Artagnan was about to retire when he felt his shoulder lightly touched. He turned and saw a young woman who made him a sign to follow her. The face of this young woman was covered with a black velvet mask, but notwithstanding this precaution, which was in fact taken rather against others than against him, he at once recognized his usual guide, the light and intelligent Mademoiselle Bonacieux. On the evening before, they had scarcely seen each other for a moment at the apartment of the Swiss guard Germain, whither D'Artagnan had sent for her. The haste which the young woman was in to convey to the queen the excellent news of the happy return of her messenger prevented the two lovers from exchanging more than a few words. D'Artagnan therefore followed Mademoiselle Bonacieux, moved by a double sentiment, love and curiosity. All the way, and in proportion as the corridors became more deserted, D'Artagnan wished to stop the young woman, seize her and gaze upon her, were it only for a minute. But quick as a bird she glided between his hands, and when he wished to speak to her, her finger placed upon her mouth, with a little imperative gesture full of grace, reminded him that he was under the command of a power which he must blindly obey, and which forbade him even to make the slightest complaint. At length, after winding about for a minute or two, Mademoiselle Bonacieux opened the door of a closet, which was entirely dark, and led D'Artagnan into it. There she made a fresh sign of silence and opened a second door concealed by tapestry. The opening of this door disclosed a brilliant light, and she disappeared. D'Artagnan remained a moment motionless, asking himself where he could be. But soon a ray of light which penetrated through the chamber, together with the warm and perfumed air which reached him from the same aperture, the conversation of two of three ladies in language at once respectful and refined, and the word majesty several times repeated, indicated clearly that he was in a closet attached to the queen's apartment. The young man waited in comparative darkness and listened. The queen appeared cheerful and happy, which seemed to astonish the persons who surrounded her, and who were accustomed to see her almost always sad and full of care. The queen attributed this joyous feeling to the beauty of the fête, and the pleasure she had experienced in the ballet, and as it is not permissible to contradict a queen, whether she smile or weep, everybody expatiated on the gallantry of the aldermen of the city of Paris. Although D'Artagnan did not at all know the queen, he soon distinguished her voice from the others, at first by a slightly foreign accent, and next by that tone of domination naturally impressed upon all royal words. He heard her approach and withdraw from the partially opened door, and twice or three times he even saw the shadow of a person intercept the light. At length a hand and an arm, surpassingly beautiful in their form and whiteness, glided through the tapestry. D'Artagnan at once comprehended that this was his recompense. He cast himself on his knees, seized the hand, and touched it respectfully with his lips. Then the hand was withdrawn, leaving in his an object which he perceived to be a ring. The door immediately closed, and D'Artagnan found himself again in complete obscurity. D'Artagnan placed the ring on his finger and again waited. It was evident that all was not yet over. After the reward of his devotion, that of his love was to come. Besides, although the ballet was danced, the evening had scarcely begun. Supper was to be served at 3, and the clock of St. Jean had struck 2:15. The sound of voices diminished by degrees in the adjoining chamber. The company was then heard departing. Then the door of the closet in which D'Artagnan was opened, and Mademoiselle Bonacieux entered. "You at last!" cried D'Artagnan. "Silence!" said the young woman, placing her hand upon his lips. "Silence, and go the same way you came." "But where and when shall I see you again?" cried D'Artagnan. "A note which you will find at home will tell you. Begone, begone!" At these words she opened the door of the corridor and pushed D'Artagnan out of the room. D'Artagnan obeyed like a child, without the least resistance or objection, which proved that he was really in love. End of chapter 22.
The LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Shanda Williams, Atlanta, Georgia, April 2006. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 23, The Rendezvous. D'Artagnan ran home immediately, and although it was 3 o'clock in the morning and he had had some of the worst quarters of Paris to traverse, he met with no misadventure. Everyone knows that drunkards and lovers have a protecting deity. He found the door of his passage open, sprang up the stairs, and knocked softly in a manner agreed upon between him and his lackey. Planchet, whom he had sent home 2 hours before from the Hôtel de Ville, telling him to sit up for him, opened the door for him. The reader may ask, how came Planchet here, when he was left stiff as a rush in London? In the intervening time Buckingham perhaps sent him to Paris, as he did the horses. "Has anyone brought a letter for me?" asked D'Artagnan eagerly. "No one has brought a letter, monsieur," replied Planchet, "but one has come of itself." "What do you mean, blockhead?" "I mean to say that when I came in, although I had the key of your apartment in my pocket, and that the key had never quit me, I found a letter on the green table cover in your bedroom." "And where is that letter?" "I left it where I found it, monsieur. It is not natural for letters to enter people's houses in this manner. If the window had been open or even ajar, I should think nothing of it. But no, all was hermetically sealed. Beware, monsieur. There is certainly some magic underneath." Meanwhile, the young man had darted into his chamber and opened the letter. It was from Mademoiselle Bonacieux, and was expressed in these terms: "There are many thanks to be offered to you and to be transmitted to you. Be this evening about 10 o'clock at St. Cloud, in front of the pavilion which stands at the corner of the house of Monsieur d'Estrées, C.B." While reading this letter, D'Artagnan felt his heart dilated and compressed by that delicious spasm which tortures and caresses the hearts of lovers. It was the first billet he had received. It was the first rendezvous that had been granted him. His heart, swelled by the intoxication of joy, felt ready to dissolve away at the very gate of that terrestrial paradise called love. "Well, monsieur," said Planchet, who had observed his master grow red and pale successively, "did I not guess truly? Is it not some bad affair?" "You are mistaken, Planchet," replied D'Artagnan, "and as a proof, there is a crown to drink my health." "I am much obliged to monsieur for the crown he had given me, and I promise him to follow his instructions exactly. But it is not the less true that letters which come in this way and to shut up houses fall from heaven, my friend, fall from heaven." "Then monsieur is satisfied?" asked Planchet. "My dear Planchet, I am the happiest of men." "And I may profit by monsieur's happiness and go to bed?" "Yes, go." "May the blessings of heaven fall upon monsieur. But it is not the less true that the letter—" And Planchet retired, shaking his head with an air of doubt, which the liberality of D'Artagnan had not entirely effaced. Left alone, D'Artagnan read and reread his billet. Then he kissed and rekissed 20 times the lines traced by the hand of his beautiful mistress. At length he went to bed, fell asleep, and had golden dreams. At 7 o'clock in the morning he arose and called Planchet, who at the second summons opened the door, his countenance not yet freed from the anxiety of the preceding night. "Planchet," said D'Artagnan, "I am going out for all day, perhaps. You are therefore your own master till 7 o'clock in the evening. But at 7 o'clock you must hold yourself in readiness with 2 horses." "There," said Planchet, "we are going again, it appears, to have our hides pierced in all sorts of ways. You will take your musketoon and your pistols.
"There now, didn't I say so?" cried Planchet. "I was sure of it, the cursed letter!" "Don't be afraid, you idiot. There is nothing in hand but a party of pleasure." "Ah, like the charming journey the other day, when it rained bullets and produced a crop of steel traps?" "Well, if you are really afraid, Monsieur Planchet," resumed D'Artagnan, "I will go without you. I prefer traveling alone to having a companion who entertains the least fear." "Monsieur does me wrong," said Planchet. "I thought he had seen me at work." "Yes, but I thought perhaps you had worn out all your courage the first time." "Monsieur shall see that upon occasion I have some left. Only I beg Monsieur not to be too prodigal of it, if he wishes it to last long." "Do you believe you still have a certain amount of it to expend this evening?" "I hope so, Monsieur." "Well, then, I count on you." "At the appointed hour I shall be ready. Only I believed that Monsieur had but one horse in the guard stables." "Perhaps there is but one at this moment, but by this evening there will be 4." "It appears that our journey was a remounting journey, then?" "Exactly so," said D'Artagnan, and nodding to Planchet, he went out. Monsieur Bonacieux was at his door. D'Artagnan's intention was to go out without speaking to the worthy mercer, but the latter made so polite and friendly a salutation that his tenant felt obliged, not only to stop, but to enter into conversation with him. Besides, how is it possible to avoid a little condescension toward a husband whose pretty wife has appointed a meeting with you that same evening at St. Cloud, opposite D'Estrées's pavilion? D'Artagnan approached him with the most amiable air he could assume. The conversation naturally fell upon the incarceration of the poor man. Monsieur Bonacieux, who was ignorant that D'Artagnan had overheard his conversation with a stranger of men, related to his young tenant the persecutions of that monster, Monsieur de Laffemas, whom he never ceased to designate during his account by the title of the cardinal's executioner, and expatiated at great length upon the Bastille, the bolts, the wickets, the dungeons, the gratings, the instruments of torture. D'Artagnan listened to him with exemplary complaisance, and when he had finished, said, "And Madame Bonacieux, do you know who carried her off? For I do not forget that I owe to that unpleasant circumstance the good fortune of having made your acquaintance." "Ah," said Bonacieux, "they took good care not to tell me that, and my wife, on her part, has sworn to me by all that's sacred that she does not know. But you," continued Monsieur Bonacieux, in a tone of perfect good fellowship, "what has become of you all these days? I have not seen you nor your friends, and I don't think you could gather all that dust that I saw Planchet brush off your boots yesterday from the pavement of Paris. You are right, my Monsieur Bonacieux. My friends and I have been on a little journey." "Far from here?" "Oh, Lord, no! About 40 leagues only. We went to take Monsieur Athos to the waters of Forges, where my friends still remain." "And you have returned, have you not?" replied Monsieur Bonacieux, giving to his countenance a most sly air. "A handsome young fellow like you does not obtain long leaves of absence from his mistress, and we were impatiently waited for at Paris, were we not?" "My faith," said the young man, laughing, "I confess it, and so much more the readily, my dear Bonacieux, as I see there is no concealing anything from you. Yes, I was expected, and very impatiently, I acknowledge." A slight shade passed over the brow of Bonacieux, but so slight that D'Artagnan did not perceive it. "And we are going to be recompensed for our diligence?" continued the mercer, with a trifling alteration in his voice, so trifling indeed that D'Artagnan did not perceive it any more than he had the momentary shade which, an instant before, had darkened the countenance of the worthy man. "Ah, may you be a true prophet!" said D'Artagnan, laughing. "No, what I say," replied Bonacieux, "is only that I may know whether I am delaying you." "Why that question, my dear host?" asked D'Artagnan. "Do you intend to sit up for me?" "No, but since my arrest and the robbery that was committed in my house, I am alarmed every time I hear a door open, particularly in the night." "What the deuce can you expect? I am no swordsman." "Well, don't be alarmed if I return at 1, 2, or 3 o'clock in the morning. Indeed, do not be alarmed if I do not come home at all." This time Bonacieux became so pale that D'Artagnan could not help perceiving it, and asked him what was the matter. "Nothing," replied Bonacieux, "nothing. Since my misfortunes I have been subject to faintnesses, which seize me all at once, and I have just felt a cold shiver. Pay no attention to it. You have nothing to occupy yourself with but being happy." "Then I have full occupation, for I am so." "Not yet. Wait a little. This evening, you said?" "Well, this evening will come, thank God, and perhaps you look for it with as much impatience as I do. Perhaps this evening Madame Bonacieux will visit the conjugal domicile." "Madame Bonacieux is not at liberty this evening," replied the husband seriously. "She is detained at the Louvre this evening by her duties." "So much the worse for you, my dear host, so much the worse. When I am happy, I wish all the world to be so, but it appears that is not possible." The young man departed, laughing at the joke, which he thought he alone could comprehend. "Amuse yourself well," replied Bonacieux, in a sepulchral tone. But D'Artagnan was too far off to hear him, and if he had heard him in the disposition of mind he then enjoyed, he certainly would not have remarked it. He took his way toward the hôtel of Monsieur de Tréville. His visit of the day before, it is to be remembered, had been very short and very little explicative. He found Tréville in a joyful mood. He had thought the king and queen charming at the ball. It is true the cardinal had been particularly ill-tempered. He had retired at 1 o'clock under the pretense of being indisposed. As to their Majesties, they did not return to the Louvre till 6 o'clock in the morning. "Now," said Tréville, lowering his voice, and looking into every corner of the apartment to see if they were alone, "now let us talk about yourself, my young friend, for it is evident that your happy return has something to do with the joy of the king, the triumph of the queen, and the humiliation of his Eminence. You must look out for yourself." "What have I to fear," replied D'Artagnan, "as long as I shall have the luck to enjoy the favor of their Majesties?" "Everything, believe me. The cardinal is not the man to forget a mystification until he has settled account with the mystifier, and the mystifier appears to me to have the air of being a certain young Gascon of my acquaintance." "Do you believe that the cardinal is as well posted as yourself, and knows that I have been to London?" "The devil! You have been to London? Was it from London you brought that beautiful diamond that glitters on your finger? Beware, my dear D'Artagnan. A present from an enemy is not a good thing. Are there not some Latin verses upon that subject? Stop!" "Yes, doubtless," replied D'Artagnan, who had never been able to cram the first rudiments of that language into his head, and who had by his ignorance driven his master to despair. "Yes, doubtless there is one." "There certainly is," said Monsieur de Tréville, who had a tincture of literature, "and Monsieur de Bonside was quoting it to me the other day. Stop a minute. Ah, this is it. Timeo Daneo e dona ferant, which means, beware of the enemy who makes you presents." "This diamond does not come from an enemy, monsieur," replied D'Artagnan. "It comes from the queen." "From the queen? Oh, oh!" said Monsieur de Tréville. "Why, it is indeed a true royal jewel, which is worth 1,000 pistoles if it is worth a denier. By whom did the queen send you this jewel?" "She gave it to me herself." "Where?" "In the room adjoining the chamber in which she changed her toilet." "How?" "Giving me her hand to kiss." "You have kissed the queen's hand?" said Monsieur de Tréville, looking earnestly at D'Artagnan. "Her Majesty did me the honor to grant me that favor." "And that in the presence of witnesses? Imprudent, thrice imprudent!" "No, monsieur, be satisfied. Nobody saw her," replied D'Artagnan, and he related to Monsieur de Tréville how the affair came to pass. "Oh, the women, the women!" cried the old soldier. "I know them by their romantic imagination. Everything that savors of mystery charms them. So you have seen the arm, that was all. You would meet the queen, and she would not know who you are?" "No, but thanks to this diamond," replied the young man. "Listen," said Monsieur de Tréville. "Shall I give you counsel, good counsel, the counsel of a friend?" "You will do me the honor, monsieur," said D'Artagnan. "Well, then, off to the nearest goldsmith's and sell that diamond for the highest price you can get from him. However much of a Jew he may be, he will give you at least 800 pistoles. Pistoles have no name, young man, and that ring has a terrible one, which may betray him who wears it." "Sell this ring? A ring which comes from my sovereign? Never!" said D'Artagnan. "Then at least turn the gem inside, you silly fellow, for everybody must be aware that a cadet from Gascony does not find such stones in his mother's jewel case." "You think, then, I have something to dread?" asked D'Artagnan. I mean to say, young man, that he who sleeps over a mine the match of which is already lighted, you consider himself in safety in comparison with you." "The devil!" said D'Artagnan, whom the positive tone of M. de Tréville began to disquiet. "The devil! What must I do?" "Above all things, be always on your guard. The cardinal has a tenacious memory and a long arm, you may depend upon it. He will repay you by some ill turn." "But of what sort?" "Eh, how can I tell? Has he not all the tricks of a demon at his command? The least that can be expected is that you will be arrested." "What? Will they dare to arrest a man in his Majesty's service?" "Pardieu, they did not scruple much in the case of Athos. At all events, young man, rely upon one who has been 30 years at court. Do not lull yourself in security, or you will be lost, but on the contrary, and it is I who say it, see enemies in all directions. If anyone seeks a quarrel with you, shun it, were it with a child of 10 years old. If you are attacked by day or by night, fight, but retreat without shame. If you cross a bridge, feel every plank of it with your foot, lest one should give way beneath you. If you pass before a house which is being built, look up, for fear a stone should fall upon your head. If you stay out late, be always followed by your lackey, and let your lackey be armed. If, by the by, you can be sure of your lackey. Mistrust everybody, your friend, your brother, your mistress above all." D'Artagnan blushed. "My mistress above all," repeated he mechanically. "And why her rather than another?" "Because a mistress is one of the cardinal's favorite means. He has not one that is more expeditious. A woman will sell you for 10 pistoles, witness Delilah. You are acquainted with the Scriptures?" D'Artagnan thought of the appointment Mademoiselle Bonacieux had made with him for that very evening, but we are bound to say, to the credit of our hero, that the bad opinion entertained by M. de Tréville of women in general did not inspire him with the least suspicion of his pretty hostess. "But, à propos," resumed M. de Tréville, "what has become of your 3 companions? I was about to ask you if you had heard any news of them." "None, monsieur." "Well, I left them on my road. Porthos at Chantilly, with a duel on his hands; Aramis at Crèvecœur, with a ball in his shoulder; and Athos at Amiens, detained by an accusation of coining." "See there now," said M. de Tréville, "and how the devil did you escape?" "By a miracle, monsieur, I must acknowledge, with a sword thrust in my breast, and by nailing the Comte de Wardes on the byroad to Calais like a butterfly on a tapestry." "There again, De Wardes, one of the cardinal's men, a cousin of Rochefort. Stop, my friend, I have an idea." "Speak, monsieur." "In your place, I would do one thing." "What?" "While his Eminence was seeking for me in Paris, I would take, without sound of drum or trumpet, the road to Picardy, and would go and make some inquiries concerning my 3 companions. What the devil! They merit richly that piece of attention on your part." "The advice is good, monsieur, and tomorrow I will set out." "Tomorrow? And why not this evening?" "This evening, monsieur, I am detained in Paris by indispensable business." "Ah, young man, some flirtation or other. Take care, I repeat to you, take care. It is woman who has ruined us, still ruins us, and will ruin us, as long as the world stands. Take my advice and set out this evening." "Impossible, monsieur." "You have given your word, then?" "Yes, monsieur." "Ah, that's quite another thing. But promise me, if you should not be killed tonight, that you will go tomorrow." "I promise it." "Do you need money?" "I have still 50 pistoles. That, I think, is as much as I shall want." "But your companions?" "I don't think they can be in need of any. We left Paris each with 75 pistoles in his pocket." "Shall I see you again before your departure?" "I think not, monsieur, unless something new should happen." "Well, a pleasant journey." "Thanks, monsieur." D'Artagnan left M. de Tréville, touched more than ever by his paternal solicitude for his Musketeers. He called successively at the abodes of Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. Neither of them had returned. Their lackeys likewise were absent, and nothing had been heard of either the one or the other. He would have inquired after them of their mistresses, but he was neither acquainted with Porthos's nor Aramis's, and as to Athos, he had none. As he passed the Hôtel des Gardes, he took a glance into the stables. 3 of the 4 horses had already arrived. Planchet, all astonishment, was busy grooming them, and had already finished 2. "Ah, monsieur," said Planchet, on perceiving D'Artagnan, "how glad I am to see you." "Why so, Planchet?" asked the young man. "Do you place confidence in our landlord, Monsieur Bonacieux?" "I? Not the least in the world." "Oh, you do quite right, monsieur." "But why this question?" "Because, while you were talking with him, I watched you without listening to you, and monsieur, his countenance changed color 2 or 3 times. Bah!" Preoccupied as monsieur was with the letter he had received, he did not observe that; but I, whom the strange fashion in which that letter came into the house had placed on my guard, I did not lose a movement of his features. "And you found it?" "Traitorous, monsieur." "Indeed?" "Still more. As soon as monsieur had left and disappeared round the corner of the street, Monsieur Bonacieux took his hat, shut his door, and set off at a quick pace in an opposite direction." "It seems you are right, Planchet. All this appears to be a little mysterious, and be assured that we will not pay him our rent until the matter shall be categorically explained to us." "Monsieur jests, but monsieur will see." "What would you have, Planchet? What must come is written." "Monsieur does not then renounce his excursion for this evening?" "Quite the contrary, Planchet. The more ill will I have toward Monsieur Bonacieux, the more punctual I shall be in keeping the appointment made by that letter which makes you so uneasy." "Then that is monsieur's determination?" "Undeniably, my friend. At 9 o'clock, then, be ready here at the hôtel. I will come and take you." Planchet, seeing there was no longer any hope of making his master renounce his project, heaved a profound sigh and set to work to groom the 3rd horse. As to D'Artagnan, being at bottom a prudent youth, instead of returning home, went and dined with the Gascon priest, who, at the time of the distress of the 4 friends, had given them a breakfast of chocolate. Chapter 23